Hi everybody in Psych 101. This is the first of many videos that we will be doing together where you will be watching me go over the PowerPoints. When it comes to doing well on the exams and on your paper and on the assignments, I would highly recommend you watch these videos first and maybe you can go over the PowerPoints as I am quickly going through them. There's skeleton notes too, and of course you want to keep up with the book. But I'm not going to test you over anything that's not on these PowerPoints. So let's get started with Chapter 1, the science of psychology. Psychology is a science. People don't think of it as one, similar to the hard sciences like biology and chemistry, but it is considered a science because we use the same types of methods, such as forming a hypothesis, testing the hypothesis, and reporting results by using statistical measures. So, the scientific method, a hypothesis. You have a prediction in advance of what you're looking for, what you're measuring, and what you predict to be the outcome. It is okay if your hypothesis turns out to be wrong. In fact, sometimes that's even more interesting to be wrong about your prediction. An experiment is the only way to prove cause and effect. You have at least two separate groups of people, or animals sometimes. You do different things to your subjects, and then you test to see what happens. It's the only way to prove cause and effect. Operational definitions. These are necessary many times in research if you need to define what you're talking about. If I'm doing a research project on anger, I should probably define what that means. Love, I need to define what that means. Intelligence, I need a definition for that as well. We're going to talk about the history of psychology for a few minutes here. It all started with philosophers. They are not considered to be psychologists. Well, not only did they not have a PhD in psychology, but they also didn't do research on what they were philosophizing about. They were merely philosophies. So, first one, René Descartes, French philosopher who postulated the mind-body problem. He is famous for a saying, "I think, therefore I am," but he is also famous for the mind-body problem. What Descartes was looking at is how are the mind and the body connected? Well, when you think about something, it can impact your body, especially if it's stressful. Things in your body can impact your mind. He's the one who philosophized. It really goes in both directions, even though he did not do research on this topic. John Locke came about 100 years later, a British philosopher, and he said, we are born a tabula rasa. And if you don't speak Latin, neither do I, tabula rasa means a blank slate. So everything that you are is things that you have learned and experienced in your life. Charles Darwin did some research, but not necessarily about this philosophy that he had, and that was survival of the fittest, adaptation. There are reasons why people and other animals survive generation after generation. There's reasons why they don't at some point. And that is, can you adapt to your environment, adaptation, and therefore survival will take place. Now we're going to go over 4 psychologists. These are people who did research in psychology. It all started in 1879 in Germany, Wilhelm Wundt. I know it looks like it says Wilhelm Wundt, but you got to use that German accent once in a while, huh? He had the first laboratory of psychology, and he named it psychology. What was he talking about? Well, introspection. He would have people come into his laboratory, and he would try to map out their 5 senses and how they think about things in their head and how that relates to physical things in their reality. And he tried to structure where these things exist in the human brain. Does that sound very scientific to you? Me neither. But you got to give him credit. In 1879, at least it was a start of mapping out the brain and what the brain does. Structuralism. About 15 years later in the United States, William James started a brand of psychology we call functionalism. How does the brain function? What William James researched that's now widely accepted is called an endless stream of consciousness. One thought leads to another, that leads to another, and that leads to another thought. It never stops, even when you're dreaming. So, endless stream of consciousness, the function of the brain, functionalism. Two more psychologists. Sigmund Freud. More people have heard of him than these other guys we're talking about, I would imagine, but Freud's theory was psychoanalysis, the unconscious mind, things that we are unaware of. That's what he studied. And John Watson is the last one, behaviorism. Only observable, measurable behaviors, that is all that we are concerned about according to Watson. So, you will also see this in your skeleton notes and in a handout that I will post under this module to help you out, a little activity so that you can get all these 7 names correct in your mind and be able to get them right on the exam too. Moving right along. The next slide on the PowerPoint says that as psychology students, and me as a psychologist, we want to be good consumers of information and display critical thinking. You don't want to believe everything that you're told. This is even more of an issue these days with social media. People post things and you don't know if it's true. So, you want to think for yourself. Independent thinking. Suspend your judgment. Wait until you have all of the facts, until you decide what is true and what is not true. Are you willing to change your opinion if you learn something that is different than what you originally believed? And willing to see gray areas. Things are not always yes or no, true or false. There's some gray areas in between. Like, do people need medicine for their psychological symptoms? Well, it's not always the same for every person. There are gray areas in almost everything. Moving along. Descriptive research. We're going to talk about 5 kinds of research in psychology, 5 ways of doing research, and the first few describe people without actually intervening. You'll see what I mean. Naturalistic observation. Observing people in their natural environment. What is good about that? Well, you get to see the way a college student is if you go to a college. You get to see the way shoppers are if you go to a store like Target or Walmart. Natural environment. Surveys. Giving people a survey online or paper pencil, you get to see what they're thinking and what they will acknowledge on your survey. And a case study. Following one person, I suppose it could be a group or a family or a couple, but usually it's one person for a significant amount of time. All of these are ways of describing people. So, in naturalistic observation, there are some problems that can arise. Great, I'm seeing kids at a preschool, they're gonna act like preschool kids. But wait a minute, what if they know they're being watched? They might change their behavior. That's called the observer effect. Observer bias. What if I have something against a particular store, like Target or Walmart, and I already have my mind made up before I go in there? Maybe I'm biased and I don't realize it. And the third problem, waiting for the event to occur. What if I'm watching people and they don't act the way I want them to, or what I'm looking for in the first place doesn't happen? I might need to go back and watch again. So, you want to see the way athletes react to a certain event? Well, what if you go there and it's raining, or it's really hot and everybody is in the dugout or, on the benches drinking water or something? Sometimes you do a research project and it doesn't come out quite the way you thought because you're waiting for the event to occur and it might not happen while you're there. Case study. What's the good and the bad about it? Following one person for a long period of time, you get a ton of interesting information. Next chapter, you're going to be introduced to a guy named Phineas Gage, a railroad worker who got a railroad spike through his brain and survived. What a crazy story. But does that mean that anyone else would have exactly the same outcome? Of course not. So as interesting and detailed as a case study can be, there's no proof that it's going to happen the same way to anyone else. A survey. That's pretty cool that you can give a survey to hundreds or thousands of people very quickly, but the problem is, do you know they're being honest with you? You don't know if you have honest and accurate information in a survey. That's the problem. Moving right along. We're now going to talk about non-descriptive methods called inferential. If I get data on people, can I infer that that's what other people are like? The answer is maybe, but maybe not. A correlation is simply a mathematical formula. If I get 2 number scores from all the people in my group, like how much did you study? That's a number score. How many minutes? And what was your test score? That's a number score. I could correlate those numbers within my group. A positive correlation and a negative correlation can go up to 1.0. Perfectly correlated. When one moves, the other one moves at the same rate of the 2 factors you're talking about. A 0 correlation means the factors are unrelated. So you have one extreme, the other extreme, and in the middle is 0. The factors are totally unrelated. A positive correlation means when one factor goes up, the other one goes up. When the first factor goes down, so does the other factor. They move in lockstep, basically. So if you own a drink business, maybe on campus, and you only sell cold beverages, I'm guessing the higher the temperature, the higher your sales. Lower temperature days, lower sales. I'm guessing it would be that pattern, a positive correlation. But wait a minute, what if you only sold hot beverages? Coffee, hot chocolate, hot tea. I'm guessing there would be a negative correlation. Temperature up, sales of those drinks would go down. Who wants a cup of hot chocolate when it's 118 outside, huh? So, temperature would go down, I bet sales would go up. They would go in opposite directions. That's a negative correlation. The big thing to know about all of this is, though, we don't know if there's any cause and effect. All we know is that the numbers are related to each other. We can't prove that one caused the other. So, moving right along. You will see a scatter plot if you like pictures. There's no pictures on the exam, showing that a forward-facing diagonal line would be a positive correlation, and a backwards-facing one is a negative correlation, where you look at the dots of each person. When one factor's up, the other's up. When one factor's down, the other's down. That would be a positive correlation, a forward-facing diagonal line, whereas a negative correlation would be exactly the opposite, negative-facing line on a scatter plot. Look at that on the PowerPoints, and I bet it will make more sense. So, moving right along. There's a whole slide on the PowerPoint saying we can't prove cause and effect. You drink more coffee and you have more sleepless nights, we haven't proven it was the coffee. Maybe you're under stress, who knows? Could be a lot of things, huh? So correlations do not prove cause and effect. An experiment does, though. You put people in 2 separate groups, and then you see which group scores differently than the other group, and you can say, yeah, I caused this because I gave them 2 different medicines, or I gave one group medicine and the other group nothing. One group gets tutoring for algebra, the other group gets nothing. That's the way to do an experiment. So, independent and dependent variables in an experiment. An independent variable is what you're changing. Am I giving one group tutoring and the other group not? Well, the independent variable is the tutoring. Does one group get medicine for their headaches, but the other group doesn't? The medicine is the independent variable. But the dependent variable is whatever you measure at the end of your study. For tutoring, I want to know what your grade is on the algebra exam. That would be the dependent variable, the outcome measure. For medication for headaches, I want to know how many headaches you have after taking the medicine. The dependent variable is the outcome measure again. Usually you have an experimental group, or maybe more than one. They get the independent variable, the tutoring or the medicine or whatever it is you're studying. Perhaps counseling they're getting in another example. The control group gets nothing. Why would you give people nothing? Because you want to see what they're like without getting the independent variable. Now here's the tricky part. There are 3 ways to give people nothing. You can give them nothing and just see what they're like without anything. That's one way. Or you could give them a placebo. Give them a pill that has nothing in it. Give them, I don't know, an alcoholic beverage, but it doesn't really have alcohol. You're tricking them. The other group got the alcohol. Some studies do that, a placebo. So you really are getting nothing, but you think you're getting the treatment. And the third way is called business as usual. If I want to see if tutoring works or study groups, I can't tell a group to not study. I'll just tell them to do what they normally do. Business as usual. If people take Advil for their headaches, that's not right for me to say you can't take any medicine. Business as usual. Just do what you normally do, but you're not getting the independent variable. You're not getting the actual treatment of the study. So, there's a perfect example here in the PowerPoint about dieting. I can't give a group no food, so instead I'm just going to tell them just keep eating what you normally eat for 6 months. I'm going to compare you to the group that is getting this new diet. By the way, doesn't it seem like there's a new diet every day? Kind of seems like it. There hasn't been a perfect one yet, so that's why this stuff is researched quite often. Next thing, ethics in research. When you work for a college or university like I do, you need some kind of board approval, institutional research or review board, and they review whether or not the study should be done in the first place. As a student, you don't have quite the same limitations as I do, but I also have to follow APA guidelines, the American Psychological Association. So one aspect of that is informed consent, getting people to sign something saying they know what they're getting into. Confidentiality, I have to let them know if I'm keeping it confidential. Debriefing, after the study is over. Debriefing means telling them what the study is about, in person or in writing, or even online. And the last thing is deception. You are allowed to trick or fool people. Sometimes that's even necessary for a study, but you have to make sure that it's actually needed as part of your study and that you're not actually hurting anybody. Those 2 things can be hard to accomplish. Animal research. 5% of psychological research involves animals. Unfortunately, the animals are hurt or killed at times. It sounds mean, but sometimes it's necessary to see if maybe a medicine will have deadly side effects on humans too. So I understand how people feel, especially animal lovers. I can totally understand, but sometimes it is seen as necessary to save, or even better, human lives. Rats and mice are used most often, 90% of animal research. How come? I don't know. Are they any less important than a puppy or a kitten? It doesn't seem like people really view that as quite as tragic, taking an animal's life, if it is a laboratory rat or a mouse, compared to other animals that we grow closer to. Especially monkeys and chimps, puppies and kittens. We don't see that too often in animal research. It's much more common that it's laboratory rats. So, we talked about deception only when it's necessary, and we have to be sure that nobody is harmed. So, that's it for chapter 1. We will be doing this for every chapter, and please stay in touch with me. Contact me and let me know what I can do to help. And also, please look at this video and the PowerPoint for each chapter and the skeleton notes and anything else so that you can do your very best in this class. That's it for now.